Well, hey, welcome to the final session, or as I guess we could call it, the final sadness, right? For Ecclesiastes. No, it's not all sad. But to be honest, I said this at the beginning and I'll say it again. I look at it completely differently after studying it. Those of you who have been here for several of them, do you look at it any differently after diving into it and seeing some of it? It's not so much a book of sadness for me as it is really a book of hope. It's actually a book of freedom for me. And so this last session, as we cover the last two chapters, is called Chasing the Future. And just as a reminder for our schedule, next week is a fifth Wednesday, which means we've got no regular service. There will be a night of prayer in here for people that want to gather and just pray. We'll be having a leadership training meeting in the other building, so there's prayer that's available if you want it, but no service. And 2 weeks from tonight is night of worship for May, which is great because we didn't have one in April because, I don't know, the worship team said it's a lot of work on Resurrection Sunday or whatever. No. We really appreciate them and everything that they do, so we gave them April off. But May is a night of worship. But on the second Wednesday in May, we will begin our next Bible study, which is Song of Songs. So very intimidated by that book, but it'll be fun. Before we jump into your fill-in-the-blank notes, I just want to give you a little bit of an introduction here. By the time we arrive here at the final two chapters of Ecclesiastes, we have seen him searching for a lot of things, and now it feels less like the teacher is searching less for new answers and more like he's gathering everything he's already discovered and placing it right in front of us one last time so that we can understand it. And so throughout this book, if you've been following along, he has explored what it is to pursue meaning, to pursue pleasure, achievement, control, security. Last week we talked about pursuing certainty. And so every single one of them offered something that feels promising at first, but just doesn't carry the full weight of life. And so the question begins to shift as we go into chapter 11. It's no longer about what life means. Now it becomes, what are we going to do with the life that we've been given? And that question naturally pulls us all towards the future. If we're trying to figure out what we're going to do with the life that we've been given, well, you can't do anything about that in the past. You can do a few things right now, but the things you do now affect the future. Most people do live with an awareness of something that's coming next. We make plans, we make goals, we have decisions, and a lot of times our decisions get delayed because we assume that there will be more time later. But there's a general belief that life is going to settle into place at some point and things won't be so crazy. I paused for laughter. So the teacher, instead of telling us how to handle all of that, he's just telling us to live faithfully in the present, even when the future remains uncertain. And that perspective was not just personal to the teacher. This is the way, I want you to understand as we close this is the way it was understood by the Jewish people who read the book of Ecclesiastes in the temple. It was especially read during the Feast of Booths. And this is when God's people would live in temporary shelters to remember their time in the wilderness. It was a celebration, it was a joyful thing for them, but it was also filled with reflection because as they lived in these temporary structures, tents, a lot of people will do it today and they'll stay for a few days in a tent during the Feast of Booths or Sukkot. And so they'll do this and it reminds them that everything is temporary. And so this was something that was a constant reminder for them that life itself is temporary. And that's the context that really gives weight to what the teacher's going to teach us here. And as I like to do, I want to share the words of Jesus before we jump in because thousands of years later, Jesus was still echoing the same sentiment. It's almost like we serve a sovereign God, right? Matthew 25, he talks about the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. And he says, the kingdom of heaven is like 10 bridesmaids who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. Maybe if you read an older translation, it says the 10 virgins, but it says 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. The 5 who were foolish didn't take enough olive oil for their lamps, but the other 5 were wise enough to take along extra oil. When the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and fell asleep. And at midnight, they were roused by the shout, look, the bridegroom is coming, come out and meet them. All the bridesmaids got up and prepared their lamps. Then the 5 foolish ones asked the others, please give us some of your oil because our lamps are going to go out. But the others said, we don't have enough for all of us. Go to a shop and buy some for yourselves. And while they were going to buy oil, the bridegroom came. And then those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was locked. Later, when the other 5 bridesmaids returned, they stood outside calling, Lord, Lord, open the door for us. And he called back, believe me, I don't know you. And Jesus said, so you too must keep watch, for you do not know the day or the hour of my return. For me, that has always been the encouragement to do everything I can to live in alignment with the Lord now. A lot of times we're like, I'm not really ready, but you have to do what you can with what you know now. And I want you to understand the historical context. This was a real thing that these people would have understood, because when you got married, the bridegroom then would go off and he would prepare a place for you. I mean, this was literally the way that it was. It's not so for a lot of relationships today, but he would go and prepare it, and then he would come back and he would get you. But if you didn't have your lamp lit when he came back, he wouldn't know where to go. You weren't going to be getting a text message from him. Hey, GPS says I'm 3 minutes out. So you had to be ready. And there's a lot of people that were trying to marry into security. So there could be people knocking on the door saying, hey, I'm supposed to be here. This is the imagery that they would have understood in that day. So it's not about, hey, one day I'll get it right. He's saying, what are you doing now? So let's go into the first 6 verses. This is where your notes start, and we'll go through the first 6 verses. I'm calling it Let Go and Live. I thought about live, laugh, love, but it's not me. All right, he says this, send your grain across the seas, and in time profits will flow back to you. But divide your investments among many places, for you do not know what risks might lie ahead. When clouds are heavy, the rains come down. Whether a tree falls north or south, it stays where it falls. Farmers who wait for perfect weather never plant. If they watch every cloud, they never harvest. Just as you cannot understand the path of the wind or the mystery of a tiny baby growing in its mother's womb, you cannot understand the activity of God who does all things. Plant your seed in the morning and keep busy all afternoon, for you don't know if profit will come from one activity or another, or maybe both. So he's starting this section with some imagery that, at least for me, feels unusual until I sat with it for a little bit, and it started to make more sense. When he's saying send your grain across the seas, or maybe you have an older translation that says cast your bread on the waters, which honestly sounds like a rap lyric for some reason to me. It's not the kind of advice most people would naturally follow, because bread is meant to be kept, eaten, and preserved, and they did not have the preservatives in the bread back then that we do now. Throwing it on the water sounds like loss or risk, and so that's the point he's making. The word that's translated as cast, when he says cast it on the water, comes from the Hebrew word shalach. Shalach, and it means to send out or to release or to let go. It's really just trying to carry the idea of taking something that's in your control and then placing it somewhere that is not in your control. And I mean, I don't think I have to really illustrate this, but don't you imagine you have a sandwich and you're at Union Point Park in New Bern and you put it in the water. That sandwich is no longer in your control, right? Okay, so the teacher's describing a view of life that is willing to release things instead of grasping for more. That's the whole idea in setting up what he said here. And so he continues on saying, invest in 7 ventures or 8. He's talking about these different things. That language is not about exact numbers. It's a Hebrew way of expressing fullness or expansion. The idea here is to live open-handed and to step forward with what you have instead of waiting for the perfect circumstances. Why? Well, he says, because you don't know what kind of disaster might come upon the land. The future is not certain, but that uncertainty is not something you'll ever fully eliminate. And that's where the teacher then challenges how we think about things like risk and control. And if I understood the stock market better, I'm sure I'd have a killer illustration for you, but most people wait for the right moment, the perfect conditions, strike while the iron's hot. We say stuff like that, right? We look for the guarantee that things are going to work out. It's a sure thing. But if you wait for the wind to be just right, you never plant, he says. And if you wait for the clouds to clear completely, you never harvest. Could you imagine if your job completely depended on the weather of North Carolina? So what we see translated as, watching the wind or speaking about someone like that is someone who is overly observant. Overly observant. Are you offended yet? Because that one offended me. Any people watchers here? We like to observe people? Okay. Yeah, don't do too much. It's talking about someone who's constantly analyzing conditions, trying to predict the perfect moment before acting. And the teacher is telling us this, it is not wisdom. It is, you ready? It is hesitation disguised as caution. Hesitation disguised as caution. And what he's trying to say is over time, it leads to inaction. It leads to inaction. Yeah, I didn't like it either. So then he brings out one more layer when he says, just as you cannot understand the path of the wind or the mystery of a tiny baby growing in its mother's womb, you can't understand the activity of God. When he's talking about understanding these things, it connects to that Hebrew word we talked about a few weeks ago that is yada, which means to know or fully grasp or comprehend. Most of us know where babies come from. If you don't, the rest of the staff is open for counseling this week. I'm booked up. Most of us know where babies come from, but very few people can say they fully comprehend all of the complexities on how a baby is formed and grown and delivered and all of this. And he's saying you may understand some stuff, but really the more you learn about something, you generally also learn how much you don't know, right? So instead of that whole concept leading to fear, he points us towards action because he doesn't want us in inaction. So he says, plant your seed in the morning, keep busy all afternoon. In other words, he's saying, live. That's not a blank, it's just good advice. He's saying live, do something, move, invest, step forward with what God has placed in your hands. But don't do it because you have a guarantee for the outcome. Do it because you can't guarantee the outcome. Why do we invest in our kids? Because we don't know who they're gonna choose to be, but we wanna be part of it. Why do we love the people that we love? Because we don't know their choices eventually, but because we want to be a part of it. Don't be frozen solid and afraid to do something and miss your chances. The teacher would never encourage reckless living. He's pushing us into a life that is faithful in the face of uncertainty. Could you imagine looking at God one day when you step into glory and he says, what did you do with all these blessings I gave you? And you said, well, I wasn't sure what to do, so I did nothing. There's another parable about that, right? The teacher would never encourage you to live recklessly because the future can't be controlled, but that doesn't mean that the present should be wasted while you're waiting on it. It shouldn't be wasted while you're waiting on it. That means we have to learn to release the need for perfect conditions before we act and recognize that waiting for certainty leads to missed opportunities. All right, the next 4 verses, 7 through 10, this is called, it's also cheery. Enjoy it while you can. He says this, light is sweet, how pleasant to see a new day dawning. That verse alone is great. You know what the modern translation of that is in church culture? Hey, how are you doing today? Well, I woke up and I'm breathing, so I'm blessed. We've all said that or heard that in some form before. Listen, he says, light is sweet, how pleasant to see a new day dawning. When people live to be very old, let them rejoice in every day of life. But let them also remember there will be many dark days. Everything still to come is meaningless. Now, I want you to remember, meaningless is that word hevel, which means it's like smoke or when you breathe in the cold and you can see your breath. You can see it, but you can't really grab it or control it. That's what he means by that. Then he turns to younger people, says, young people, it's wonderful to be young. Enjoy every minute of it. Do everything you want to do. Take it all in. But remember that you must give an account to God for everything you do. So refuse to worry and keep your body healthy. But remember that youth, with a whole life before you, is meaningless. Okay. So after telling us to step forward without waiting for certainty, without waiting for guarantees in life, now the teacher turns and reminds us of something that is just as important. And just because it's a cliche doesn't mean it's not true. Life is a gift. It really is. And it's meant to be enjoyed while you have it. When he's saying light is pleasant to see the sun, it's a simple statement, but it really carries weight. The ability to wake up and to see it and to experience another day, these are not small blessings. And just because you've had that blessing yesterday and you had it today, doesn't mean you get it tomorrow. So the word that is translated pleasant there comes from the Hebrew word na'em, which refers to something that is delightful or agreeable. My favorite translation is this, something that is good in a way that settles the soul. Science catches up with scripture a lot of times. And there's a lot of studies that say it's really good to step outside when you first wake up. If you can get outside and have sunlight hit your body, or even have your feet touch grass, that there is something about it. I understand some people get up at 3 a.m. and where there's darkness and gnashing of teeth, but if you can, like studies say it's a really great thing for your body, he's talking about what a blessing this is, okay? He's saying it's good in a way that settles the soul, and he's not talking about the extraordinary mountaintop moments of your life. He's pointing to the everyday reality of don't miss the blessings of today. When he goes on to say, people live to be very old, let them rejoice, that encouragement feels surprising after he said everything's meaningless, but he's saying that they should enjoy it. And he's just saying, but as you enjoy a long life, know that even a long life has limits. And even at that, he doesn't ignore the limits. Eventually he says, remember that there will be many dark days. The word translated dark, by the way, comes from the Hebrew word chosek, and it means obscurity or difficulty or a season where you have no clarity. A season where you have no clarity. Even if you've never used that sentence, I think we can all think of a phase of life where we're like, I have had no clarity. And the teacher is holding both realities in the same time. Life is good and life is hard. There's light, but there's darkness, and wisdom learns to live in both because you can't avoid either one. And that's why then he turns his attention to the youth. He says, young people, it's wonderful to be young, enjoy every minute of it, not because of the age, but just because those are the seasons where you have a different kind of strength and energy and opportunity. He's saying there's moments in life where the ability to make decisions in general is more available to you. So if you're young, he's saying don't waste that. But as you make your decisions, he then adds that line that should make every believer slow down, which is remember that you must give an accounting to God for everything you do. That's where enjoyment must be framed correctly because it can't be careless, it can't be self-centered. Enjoyment is meant to be lived with this awareness that God is going to hold you accountable. And that word that's translated as account comes from the Hebrew word mishpat. Mishpat. It means judgment, justice, or evaluation. What would life be like if at the end of every day we went to the Lord and we said, give me a grade? You live a little differently. I know that because I'm you. It reminds us life really isn't random. It's something that is seen by God, and the teacher's telling us every part of it matters. When he says, refuse to worry, keep your body healthy, he's talking really about this word worry, and it connects to the Hebrew word ka'as, which we've also seen earlier, but means frustration, agitation, or internal distress. Internal distress. Those of you who struggle with anxiety, first of all, I am among you. Second of all, internal distress is a great way to describe anxiety. And it's the kind of emotional weight that can steal the joy out of a present moment where you could be surrounded by blessings and you feel unable to tap in or enjoy it. Who has not been there before? He's just warning you about letting the difficulty of life consume the life that you've been given. But remember this, youth, strength, opportunity, they are all fleeting. They pass quickly. They are all vapor, hevel, or as he said, meaningless. But in today's meaning of the word meaningless, they're truly not meaningless, right? They're valuable. That's what he's trying to teach us. By saying that they're fleeting, you can't hold it, you can't control it, he's actually underscoring, this is so valuable, don't waste it. So renewing our minds on this means learning to receive life as a gift instead of postponing it for a future that you can't control or for a future you don't even know will arrive. We have to recognize enjoyment's not found in having everything, but in seeing everything that's already been given. The next section is the first 7 verses of the final chapter of Ecclesiastes, chapter 12, verses 1 through 7, and I'm calling it Remember Your Creator. Since we're talking to the youth, he says, don't let the excitement of youth cause you to forget your Creator. I'm sure nobody here struggled with that when they were younger than they are today. I ran from him. He says, honor him in your youth before you grow old and say life is not pleasant anymore. He said, remember him before the light of the sun, moon, and stars is dim to your old eyes and rain clouds continually darken your sky. Remember him before your legs, the guards of your house, start to tremble, and before your shoulders, the strong men stoop. Remember him before your teeth, your few remaining servants, stop grinding, and before your eyes, the women looking through the windows see dimly. Remember him before the door to life's opportunities is closed and the sound of work fades. Now you rise at the first chirping of the birds, but then all their sounds will grow faint. He says, remember him before you become fearful of failing and worry about danger in the streets. Do you remember that? Do you remember a time in life where you were not worried about anything in the future? Adulting is hard. He said, before your hair turns white like an almond tree in bloom. Why did we ever lose that description? And you drag along without energy like a dying grasshopper, and the caperberry no longer inspires sexual desire. Remember him before you're near the grave, your everlasting home, when the mourners will weep at your funeral. Verses 6 and 7, he says, remember your Creator now while you're young, before the silver cord of life snaps and the golden bowl is broken. Don't wait until the water jar is smashed at the spring and the pulley's broken at the well, for then the dust will return to the earth and the spirit will return to God who gave it. It's a very sobering section of scripture. But after telling us to live fully in the present, he turns and gives us the full reason why this matters so much. When he's saying don't let the excitement of youth, he's saying don't get distracted. No matter your age, no matter where you're at in life, this matters. And I think sometimes we lose this thought as we get older. And I think sometimes we start to look down on people that are younger than us. Youth is not wrong, obviously, it's just temporary, but the teacher's warning against a specific type of distraction that occurs in our younger years. A lot of times as we get older, we're not as distracted by the same things that used to excite us and distract us, because I'd like to say we learned some things, but we learned it from life kicking us around for a while. And then we look at somebody younger than us and we wonder, like, why won't they listen? Why won't they do it this way? Well, sometimes they got to get kicked. And that word remember comes from the word zakar. It means more than simply recalling something mentally. It's like the whole idea of calling something to mind in a way that changes or shapes your life. It's living with the awareness that changes how you act, changes how you act. It is to remember your Creator. It means not just to believe in him, but to live with him at the center of your decisions, the center of your decisions. In other words, you ever have that moment where somebody asks you to do something as a kid and you're like, no, and they say why, and you're like, because my dad will kill me or something like that. I'm not saying he's going to come down and thump you from the sky, but he is at the center of your decisions. It's not just that he exists. And what follows after this is not really a list of instructions. It's a carefully crafted poetic picture of what it really looks like as life slowly fades. The teacher's talking about aging through really, really somber imagery, and he talks about the sun, the moon, the stars all growing dim, clouds coming in, the keepers of the house trembling, strong men bent over. Every single image there points to something that is familiar, and especially to people in that day, they would have understood all these things, the pulleys, the windows, and all of this, because it was all their lifestyle. And while it's not the happiest of thoughts, it's not written to discourage you, it's just written to be honest. One of the hardest things to find in churches, at least in America today, is honesty. You'll find the scripture preached, but it is full of, hey, how are you doing? And then a fake answer. And he's trying to give it to you straight. Your days are numbered, and I hope you have many of them. There's still a number to them. So don't lose sight of this. That Hebrew word translated as difficult comes from the Hebrew word ra'ah. Ra'ah, it means hardship, just hardship or adversity. And by the way, he's not saying every moment of aging is painful. Certainly there are some, but he's just saying that life becomes more limited, more fragile. It becomes more dependent. As that moves on, the imagery becomes even more personal when he starts talking about doors closing and work fading and sleep being lighter and fears increasing. And he's saying, don't let this happen to you. And then he finally gets to the heavier part where he talks about the silver cord being severed and the golden bowl is broken. These phrases describe the end of life itself. He's talking about the body returning to dust from which it came, and then the life within us returning to the God who gave it. But that word translated as spirit here, I know that we have seen a lot of ruach, but that word for spirit there is neshama. Neshama, and it actually refers to breath or the life force given by God. It's a specific kind of life force or energy given from God. But it is the same idea that you see in Genesis when God breathes life into humanity, when he forms him out of the dust of the earth. And the teacher's just trying to remind us, your life was never something that you self-generated. It was given to you by him. It was sustained by him. And one day it'll be returned to him. And that's the direction that life moves, and he teaches us that to wake us up, because if life is temporary, then what we do with it matters more than we really thought. If our strength is going to fade, then the time to live with strength intentionally is now. If mental clarity will not increase forever, then the time to pursue what matters the most with your mental acuity is now. So we have to learn to refuse to push God to the edges of our lives until later, until we just need him at a last second. We got to pursue him with everything we've got now. Don't wait until life is fading to start living for what matters the most. All right, we're in the home stretch. Verses 8 through 12, the teacher's final words. And then we're going to give you the answer he found after all of this. He says this, everything is meaningless, says the teacher. Completely meaningless. Isn't it interesting? Now it's not really coming from his mouth in the same way. It's almost like in the third person. He says, keep this in mind. The teacher was considered wise, and he taught the people everything he knew. He listened carefully to many proverbs, studying them and classifying them, and the teacher sought to find just the right words to express truths clearly. The words of the wise are like cattle prods, painful but helpful. Their collected sayings are like a nail-studded stick with which a shepherd drives the sheep. He really wanted you to understand what this was. And in verse 12, he says, but my child, let me give you some further advice. Be careful, for writing books is endless, and much study wears you out. Offensive. Thanks for coming here for study tonight. As the teacher starts to close here, he is stepping back and reflecting on everything that he just said. He's basically summarizing it using the same word he used at the very beginning. When he says everything is meaningless, that's this word, hevel, that we talked about earlier. Something like vapor or mist. But that word itself really brings the entire book full circle if you let it. After exploring every path, testing every pursuit, and examining every single angle because life felt meaningless, he came to the same conclusion. Everything under the sun is temporary. It's temporary. Everything under the sun is temporary. And so that means everything we try to build our lives on will eventually slip through our hands if we expect it to last forever. He does something really important here. He shifts from observing life to reflecting on his role as our teacher. And he's reminding us that his words were not thrown together. It wasn't somebody having a bad day writing sad poetry. He intentionally pondered and searched and studied Proverbs. And that word that's translated as pondered comes from the Hebrew word takan. Takan, it's the whole idea of weighing something or examining it or setting something in order. It's not random. This was thoughtful and intentional. And he also says that he sought to find just the right words. The teacher was not trying to impress anyone. He's not trying to seem eloquent. He's trying to communicate something that would last, and I think he did. So he describes what these words are meant to do. You remember what he called them? The words of the wise are like a cattle prod. Something used to guide or to push or move something forward when it would otherwise stand still. That word translated as goads, like to goad a sheep forward, is from the word darban, and it refers to a pointed stick used to direct animals. Guys, we're animals. I thought about looking up a cattle prod and showing it on the screen here, even though we don't typically have slides on a Wednesday night, but every time I looked up a cattle prod, it really just looked like a piece of wood with a nail through it. I think we can all picture that. That's what the words of the wise are like. It's meant to be something that's painful, but you won't stay where you are once you're faced with it. And that's the whole purpose of it. In the same way, wisdom is not always comfortable. It moves us and challenges us. And then he closes with one small warning, which, as I said, was offensive. He said, be careful, for writing books is endless and much study wears you out. What he's trying to get across here is this. He's reminding us that knowledge alone is not the goal. Have you ever met somebody who knows a lot about the scripture, a lot about ancient history, and no relationship with the Lord? He's reminding us knowledge alone is not the goal. You can keep searching and reading and analyzing and still miss the point if it never moves how you actually live. If what you learn doesn't impact how you live, it's useless. In fact, I would call it hevel. Last section, last two verses, the final conclusion. Here's what he says. That's the whole story. Here now is my final conclusion. Fear God and obey his commands, for this is everyone's duty. And the very last thing this book says is this: God will judge us for everything we do, including every secret thing, whether good or bad. Does that encourage you or scare you? A little both? Okay. After pages and pages of these tensions and questions and observations and honesty and wrestling, he gathers it all and puts it into a place where everything is final now. He has walked every possible road, tested everything out for himself, and at the end, he just said, fear God and obey his commands. That's everyone's duty. So at first glance, that might seem too simple, but have you ever learned that simple things are not always easy things? We have to maintain reverence, stay in awe of the Lord, have a right awareness of who God is in relation to us. It's not fear in the sense of being afraid, like if I do the wrong thing, I'm gonna get struck with lightning. We've already addressed that in a previous week. You can't control blessings by doing the right things, and you can't control what feels like hardships by doing the right things. You just can't control life. This is more along the lines of just the recognition that God is God and we're not. And so after everything that we can't control and can't predict, after everything we can't fully understand, he's saying this is the only safe place to stand. But that reverence that you have is not meant to be internal. If you're in awe of God, it has to move outward into obedience in your life. That's why he said keep his commands. That word keep sounds old when you say keep his commands. Most of us don't say to our kids, clean your room and keep the rules of the house. That word keep is shamar. It means to guard or watch over or carefully attend to something. Carefully attend to something. It's this picture of somebody holding something valuable with great intentionality. It's not about checking religious obligations. Well, I go to church every Sunday. You ever notice that becomes convenient once you have friends? Right? So, it's not about doing the religious thing. Yesterday, I said to my kids, do you want to play a video game? And they said no, because they had to go water their plants. I had to wait 7 minutes. They have this little plant, right? They were doing the right thing, right? They were doing the right thing. They were holding it with a sense of importance. So it's not something you check off. It's a responsibility. He calls it a duty. Now, all of that being said, the teacher says everyone's duty. The idea under that runs deeper than the obligation we were talking about because the Hebrew word kol points out to the whole, the entirety, or the completeness of something. In other words, he's saying this is what life actually looks like. It's not a life that has everything figured out. It's just pointed towards God in the middle of everything it can't figure out. And then that final layer that he adds to level the playing field for everybody, he says God will judge us for everything we do, including every secret thing, good or bad. And the word that's translated there as judge, it comes from the Hebrew word shafat, which means bringing things into right order, or evaluating with justice. It's not as much about punishment for the wrong things as it is about being accountable and making sure that nothing in our lives is ultimately insignificant. And this is actually encouraging if you look at it in the right light, okay? Because he's teaching us this, that even the hidden parts of life are included. And so most of us, when we read that, we think about some of the worst thoughts we've ever had, the things that we would never say out loud, and there's not a human being in this room who has not had things that they would be ashamed to get up here and say. But he's saying this, the word secret, which is sathar, it's talking about what is concealed, what is done out of sight or what nobody else sees. And he's reminding us that life is not measured only by what's visible or recognized, but the internal decisions we make, those unseen moments, they all matter because they are all lived before God. And to be honest with you, that's encouraging to me because if you remember when we were talking about thirsting for justice, yes, all of our secret thoughts are accountable to the Lord, but at the same time, so are everyone else's. So if you've ever had a moment where you were struggling with somebody or struggling with a situation and it felt like they didn't, get any sort of accountability, they're going to. Maybe they have and you don't know it, but even if they haven't, they're going to. Everything is lived in front of God. None of us escape it. And so that final conclusion settles in and everything that the teacher said begins to find its right place. Life is vapor, temporary, unpredictable, and confusing. But the message of Ecclesiastes is this: it's not actually meaningless because it's lived in the presence of a God who sees and a God who knows and who will ultimately bring all things into right order, even if it's not on your timeline. So we have to allow this truth to recenter how we live. Instead of chasing control, we walk in reverence. Instead of demanding certainty or a different form of control, we learn to live in obedience. We start measuring life not by what we can build or achieve, but we see it through the lens of what actually lasts, and that's the relationship that we have with the Lord. All right, if you're watching on the live stream, we're going to go ahead and end it here. We're going to have group discussion, and then in about half an hour or so, we'll move into some acoustic worship to end the night. Thanks for being here and going through Ecclesiastes with us.